Let me welcome all the doctors to the session. It's All Health Host. I'm Ekta Ganwani and I'll be your hall coordinator for this session. To judge this, may I now invite Dr. Boral Subendu Kumar, Dr. Prashant Keshav Bavankule, Dr. Satyem Deka, Dr. S. Natarajan, Dr. Ajit Babu Maiji, Dr. Meena Chakrabarti, Dr. Vishal Agrawal, Dr. Malika Goyal, Dr. Dinesh Garg, Dr. Sunil Ganikal. I welcome you all. You all can start calling all the speakers one by one. The timings are going to be very strict and we must adhere to the same so that we get to listen to all the speakers. I wish all of you good luck and let's have a great time in this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll start with Dr. Prasenjit Mandal. Dr. Prasenjit Mandal.
Is he there or not there?
Dr. Prasenjit Mandal probably not logged in, sir.
A 26-year-old male patient presented with dimness of vision in his left eye since last 3 months with no systemic disorders. On examination, right eye visual acuity was 6/6 and left eye 6/60. Anterior segment examination revealed both the eyes within normal limits. Fundus examination revealed right eye within normal limits and left eye optic disc pit. Optic disc pit is a scenario where we find the optic nerve pit with central serous chorioretinopathy, which means that the patient has a congenital optic nerve pit which at some point in the lifetime of the patient collects fluid under the macula, which leads to the decrease in the vision of the patient. The OCT reveals skytic changes at the macula. The standard procedures for the management are pars plana vitrectomy with or without ILM peeling and gas injection. Here we plan for a novel technique of ILM flaps to seal the optic disc pit. Standard 3 ports are made 4 mm from the limbus as it is a phakic patient. We can see the congenital optic disc pit in the temporal margin of the disc and an altered reflex of the fovea, which is due to the presence of the fluid collection. We start with a core vitrectomy. Triamcinolone is injected. PVD is induced. Once PVD is induced, brilliant blue G dye is injected. ILM peeling is started by the pinch and peel technique. Our aim is to peel circumferentially. And to go over the macula very gently. Generally, I peel around 2 disc diameters of internal limiting membrane around the macula. Now here we plan for the ILM flaps to seal the pit. Now we prepare the ILM flap for sealing of the optic nerve head. Now we can see BBG stained ILM flap sealing the optic disc pit. We put a drop of viscoelastic over the flap to keep it stable over the pit. A very light laser is done in the temporal margins of the ring. Before we can apply laser, we will titrate it peripherally so that we do not do a dense laser. A very mild blanching of the grey burns are given at the temporal edge. 2 rows of burns are enough. The aim of which is to possibly create a very light barrage to prevent any passage of fluid from within the pit towards the macula. Fluid air exchange is done very gently so that the flap remains in situ over the optic disc pit. C3F8 gas is injected, cannulas are removed, ports closed. Post-operative 1 month, we can see some cystic changes still persisting in the macula, but the best corrected visual acuity improved to 6/18. Post of 3 months, the macula is absolutely flat and the optic disc pit is sealed. Best corrected visual acuity improved to 6/9. So we can conclude that ILM flap sealing of the optic disc pit is a novel technique for the management of optic disc pit maculopathy. Thank you.
Doctors, just a quick update. The next video that we'll be playing is of Dr. Raja Ram because he has to leave for another session in another hall. So his video number VT49 must be played next. Please note.
And the could bit of
We present a case of a post-traumatic submacular hemorrhage with macular hole. 16-year-old boy presented with diminution of vision following injury with a blunt object. He was referred to as 3 days following trauma. He had a visual acuity of 20/400. On examination, there was a thick subretinal hemorrhage surrounded by subretinal fluid and a macular hole. Indirect ophthalmoscopy showed some minimal vitreous hemorrhage with no retinal tears in periphery. OCT confirmed thick submacular hemorrhage with backshadowing and surrounding subretinal fluid and a full thickness macular hole. He was taken up for a 23 gauge vitrectomy. Posterior vitreous detachment was induced and complete vitrectomy was done, and retinal periphery was inspected for any retinal tears. There were none. Brilliant blue dye was used to stain the internal limiting membrane. Tissue plasminogen activator was loaded into a syringe with 41 gauge needle on a 23 gauge cannula and connected to the viscous fluid injection module of vitrectomy system. With foot switch control, the TPA is injected gradually by the surgeon. As the drug is being injected, one can see the hemorrhage partially draining into the vitreous cavity through the macular hole. The blood was aspirated with silicone tipped flute needle and then proceeded with inverted ILM peeling. Nasal and inferior ILM peeling was done, and subsequently some more drug was injected as it was felt that the initial blood was inadequate. After achieving a good blood size, air fluid exchange was done and ILM flaps were manipulated under air to cover the macular hole. Isoexpansile SF6 gas injection was done at the end of surgery.
Video and audio block. Video and audio block. Yeah.
5 days, there was complete displacement of submacular hemorrhage with underlying choroidal rupture clearly visible. OCT confirms the closure of the macular hole with choroidal rupture and scar seen. The boy recovered a vision of 20/80. Thank you for watching.
Should we have a question after each video or no?
Yeah, I think if you have to present about leave otherwise, I believe. Are we supposed to ask questions?
Generally, we are supposed to ask questions in the regular video sessions when we have. But how many minutes are for each video? And how many minutes are available extra?
8 minutes actually. There is no special allocation for questions actually.
No, I know. But what I'm saying, 8 into how many are there between 2 to
20.
Total 17 are there.
17 into 8 is 80.
Let me calculate 17 into 8.
56, 20, 136. That means 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's why it's better not to have any questions.
No, you can have one question if you want. 2 to 425. So that means 60, 85. Where is the time then?
Vitreoretinal surgeries are technically one of the most demanding surgeries in the field of ophthalmology. These involve intricate steps and have higher chances of intraoperative complications or unanticipated situations. Thus, imparting surgical training for these multi-layered surgeries is a big challenge. Observing competent surgeons perform these surgeries and then attempting directly onto the patients is the traditional approach. This not only compromises patient safety but increases surgery time and also the stress levels of the trainees, sometimes leading to sleepless nights. Wet lab practice on cadaveric eyes can improve the hand-eye coordination and give a basic orientation to tissue handling. But this has its own limitations such as availability and handling of these eyes, requirement of separate instrumentation which cannot be used further onto the patients. Simulators are a great tool in training the budding surgeons, but they are very expensive and available at few centers, especially in the developing countries. Recognizing the limitations of all these approaches, we designed a simple, cost-effective, practical eye model, Ready Surge, which would help beginners to acquire essential skills required for VR surgeries. Model Eye is designed using 3D printing. An eyeball is sketched based on its anatomy, which is then incorporated into the CAD software with appropriate dimensions. The model consists of two hemispheres. The upper one is made up of flexible material, that is TPU, which has same tonicity as that of human sclera. The lower part is made up of PLA. Preparation of the retinal film. A colored printout sheet is folded into a hemisphere using the concept of cave comb wrapping. A 3D printed tracer is used to customize the fundus printout so that it fits perfectly into the eyeball model. For a realistic fundus image, we can print it on a PETG sheet and then shape with thermoforming technology. A microscope handle cover is fitted into a cardboard box with a hole in the center. The model eye is then placed over this assembly. Two ports which simulate the superior sclerotomies are made in the eyeball using the 23 gauge tricars. These ports allow the introduction of the instruments into the posterior segment. This assembly is then used in conjunction with the operating microscope fitted with the biome to visualize the posterior segment and practice various steps of VR surgery. The biggest advantage of our model is that it has been designed by using indigenous materials that are readily available in our hospital, making it inexpensive, with a total cost of less than $5, whereas the commercial eye model kits cost more than $100. Secondly, it can be used for practice inside the operating room without the need for separate instrumentation, including the viewing system. But the most important aspects of VR surgery is the focusing and adjustment of the microscope to obtain an optimum view of the retina, especially the periphery. Beginners face a lot of trouble in this aspect, but it can be overcome with practice using this model. Manual dexterity is the basic skill required for all VR surgeries. This model helps the trainees to achieve the desired flexibility of the non-dominant hand required for performing bimanual maneuvers during these surgeries. Ready Search can also be used to practice the basic component of core vitrectomy, that is, illuminating the retina and the vitreous to be removed without losing the focus of the microscope. Endolaser can also be practiced on this PETG film. The burns resemble those on the human retina, and the power settings are comparable with the real-life scenario. Further, it helps beginners in developing the sense of awareness regarding the position of instruments inside the eye to avoid inadvertent complications like retinal touch. The trainees can then be assessed by a vitreoretinal surgeon on the basis of the above skills. Once they are competent to perform these steps on the model eye, they can then perform them on the patient. This decreases the anxiety level of the trainees, improves their proficiency in complex steps, avoid disastrous complications, and hence improve patient care. Thus, Ready Search is a simple, economical, and reusable model in training the budding surgeons for VR surgeries.
The next video will be of Dr. Krishnendu Nandi. I request everyone to mute their mics if they are not talking because it can create echo problems.
Beatty's crystalline dystrophy, a rare case. A 38-year-old lady presented to us with reduced vision in her left eye since the last few years, which had worsened gradually over time to the current level. Her best corrected visual acuity was 3/60 in the right eye and finger counting 4 meters in the left eye. She had a previous history of myopic choroidal neovascular membrane in the right eye, which had regressed upon treatment with multiple anti-VEGF injections. On examination, the anterior segment was unremarkable. Fundus examination showed presence of yellowish-white crystalline deposits in both fundi, suggestive of Beatty's crystalline dystrophy, with macular scarring in the right eye and myopic maculopathy in the left eye. Optical coherence tomography imaging of the left eye revealed foveoschisis along with the presence of a hole in the inner lamella of fovea. As the patient had been following up regularly over the years, due to her previous history of myopic CNVM, it was possible for us to document the gradual worsening of her vision in the left eye through serial optical coherence tomographs, which depicted how the schitic cavity increased in size and how the inner lamellar hole developed over time to come to the present scenario. Vitrectomy along with internal limiting membrane peeling and intraocular gas tamponade was planned. After necessary blood tests and physician fitness, patient was posted for surgery. Vitrectomy was initiated after making 3 23-gauge ports. After performing the core vitrectomy, posterior vitreous detachment was induced. and the vitrectomy completed peripherally with the help of triamcinolone acetonide. The myopic fundus of the patient was clearly visible, along with the yellowish white deposits characteristic of Beattie's crystalline dystrophy. Fluid air exchange was done. Brilliant blue-green dye was injected into the vitreous cavity and kept for a minute to achieve satisfactory staining of the internal limiting membrane. The vitreous cavity was again filled with fluid before proceeding further. Under high magnification, ILM peeling was initiated. A finesse loop was used to roll up the edges of the ILM in a circular fashion around the macula. These rolled up edges were then grasped with an ILM forceps and brought in centripetally to lie over the inner lamellar hole. ILM peeling was extended further till the arcades. The vitrectomy cutter was used with almost nil vacuum to trim the ILM flap, which was positioned to cover the lamellar hole. Fluid air exchange was repeated. And intraocular gas tamponade was done with non-expansile mixture of sulfur hexafluoride and air. In the postoperative period, the patient was put on topical antibiotics, steroids and cycloplegic agents and advised for prone positioning for a period of 8 to 10 hours per day for a week's time. On follow-up after 2 weeks, her vision improved to 636 in the left eye. Postoperative OCT showed closure of the macular hole along with reattachment of the fovea, though significant foveal thinning was noted. On subsequent visits, her vision seemed to be maintained. Thus, a planned surgical approach in the described scenario helped in stabilizing the vision of the patient having a rare combination of myopic traction maculopathy and Beattie's crystalline dystrophy. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Dr. Darius Shroff's video because he has to also go to another session in the other hall. The video number is BT59.
Thank you so
And
much.
Dr. Darius is here in the meeting as well.
Good evening. Outfoxing the fox. Hi Gagan, what's up? You look unhappy.
Hi Darius. I am so depressed.
What's troubling you, my friend?
Lately, I have been burdened with so many recurrent retinal detachments.
I enjoy operating on these.
Enjoy? My heart sinks when I see such a case. Is there something special you do?
It's a mind game. You need to think out of the box to outwit this fox. Let's discuss a few situations. One of the most common causes of a recurrent RD is that the posterior hyaloid may still be attached. This was the case of a young man with an inferior recurrent RD with silicone oil in situ. We have performed a silicone oil removal and are now trying to ensure removal of the posterior hyaloid around the optic nerve. You can see how difficult this is in detached and thin retina. So we inject brilliant blue dye and peel the ILM. ILM peeling is one way to ensure that the posterior hyaloid is fully removed and the retina mobilized. Do go in for a wider peel and you are set. This lady had a recurrence 2 years post silicone oil removal. There was an inferior shallow RD along with previous laser marks, but no obvious break was seen. We tried to locate the break with the help of Schlerin with a brush needle, but we were unsuccessful. We thought out of the box and made a 38 gauge retinotomy and slowly injected subretinal brilliant blue dye. As the dye filled the subretinal space, we had a eureka moment. We saw the blue dye emerge from a very tiny temporal break near a laser mark. Once the break was found, we removed the dye with a brush needle, then performed the fluid air exchange and settled the retina. Hey, I can see you happy now.
Wow, Darius, that's some outwitting. Darius, in the hands of the best surgeons also, sometimes while removing peripheral circumferential traction membrane, we end up with a huge retinotomy.
In these cases, I like to perform a maneuver called tug of war, based on the shearing force a rope undergoes during the game. We use opposing forceps to tug and shear the membranes gently and relieve the traction without resorting to a retinotomy. See this young, highly myopic girl with circumferential traction bands predisposing to anterior PVR. This maneuver allowed us to bimanually release anterior circumferential traction. We took 2 forceps at 180 degrees to each other, then pulled and shredded the bands holding up the retina. Once the bands were separated from the underlying retina, they could be safely trimmed by the vitrectomy cutter. As the traction was released, the retina fell back and settled without requiring any retinotomies. With a sigh of relief, we performed laser to the attached retina.
Darius, now that we know how to settle the retina, what tamponade should one use?
In certain situations with recurrent inferior detachments, a heavier than water tamponade is useful. We use heavy silicone oil like Denseron. Unlike routine silicone oil, this gives adequate support to the inferior retina, which is the most common site of reproliferation causing recurrences. See the case of this 45-year-old obese computer professional with a recurrence after scleral buckling as well as vitrectomy. He wasn't willing to position any more as he found positioning uncomfortable and he was worried about losing his job. So, after resurgery, we put heavy oil as a tamponade. This helped to comfortably stabilize his inferior retina. Post heavy oil removal, his retina was attached with 20 by 40 vision. When a recurrent RD does appear, it leaves you paralyzed with fear, makes your brain go into a tailspin, and you don't really know where to begin. But you needn't fear or tremble, my friend. These tricks will help you succeed in the end. Remember, the posterior hyaloid always to remove. Adding a belt buckle will help you groove. Tug of war will help with circumferential traction. And brilliant blue will locate the site of action. To outwit this cunning fox, just work hard and think out of the box.
All right. Up next, we have the video for Dr. Sangeet Mittal, BT45.
I'm present.
Yes, Dr. Krishnendu Nandi's video will have after Dr. Sangeet Mittal's because he also has to leave for a session.
Controlled cannular drainage is a simple technique using a 26-gauge intravenous catheter for drainage of suprachoroidal or subretinal fluids. No fancy equipment, no new instrument or no additional skills are required. To demonstrate the technique, let's take this case of 35-year-old male with bullous retinal detachment. The retina was so bullous that there was no space to perform vitrectomy. A 26-gauge intravenous catheter is taken and inserted obliquely, with bevel pointing away from the globe, as far from limbus as possible. The tip of the catheter is then visualized and confirmed to be in the right space. Once confirmed, the plastic cannula is then advanced forward while the metallic trocar is withdrawn. The fluid is seen coming out of the cannula. The cannula is then connected to the extrusion pump of the vitrectomy machine so that the speed of drainage could be foot controlled. The drainage could be fast if we need to create space, or it could be slow to prevent injury to the tissue. Controlled cannular drainage offers many surgical advantages. 56-year-old female, who had undergone scleral buckling for repair of retinal detachment, presented with recurrence of RD along with massive choroidal detachment extending posteriorly. 26-gauge IV cannula was inserted in suprachoroidal space at the point of highest elevation. Because this Teflon cannula is malleable, it can be easily maneuvered in subretinal or suprachoroidal space. This cannula easily conforms to available space and thus reduces the risk of retinal or choroidal injury. Because the tip of cannula is blunt, it need not be removed when the space becomes shallow. This ensures complete removal of the fluid. As the approach is transconjunctival, drainage can be done at multiple sites. Due to bigger length of cannula, it can reach to posterior pockets even up to macula. As the cannular tip is blunt and does not cause injury, it does not require continuous visualization. It can be left in place while performing other procedures, for example doing endolaser while the cannula is still in place. This is a case of post-trauma, intraocular foreign body with choroidal detachment and hemorrhage. Due to massive choroidals, there was no space to perform proper vitrectomy. Controlled cannular drainage was done in fast mode to create space. The speed of drainage was reduced as the choroid became flat to prevent any tissue incarceration. This is a case of PDR with bullous combined retinal detachment. Controlled cannular drainage can help to flatten the retina without creating unwanted retinotomies at the beginning of surgery. This helps in visualization and dissection of pre-retinal membrane. Note the presence of cannula in subretinal space while the fluid is getting drained. 8-year-old boy was diagnosed to have Coats disease with exudative retinal detachment and retina was lying behind the lens. Controlled cannular drainage in these eyes helps to create space for insertion of instruments during vitrectomy. It also avoids retinotomy and internal drainage, which can result in conversion of exudative RD to rhegmatogenous RD. Again, the cannula can be left in place for continuous drainage of subretinal fluid while completing the vitrectomy. Vitrectomy is done, PVD is induced as the retina flattens. A 65-year-old female presented 12 days after cataract surgery with vitreous hemorrhage, retinal detachment, subretinal hemorrhage, suprachoroidal hemorrhage and a possible needle perforation. Controlled cannular drainage was done to drain the choroidal detachment. After flattening the choroidals, a large retinectomy was done to drain subretinal fluid. First, the brush needle was introduced in the subretinal space through a small opening to drain the bulk of subretinal blood. This prevents the overspill of blood in the vitreous cavity. A chandelier light was inserted and PFCL was used to flatten the retina. This was followed by 360 degrees endolaser barrage and silicone oil injection. Two months post-operative, the retina was attached and the best corrected visual acuity had improved to 6/24. The patient is advised removal of silicone oil. Besides these, the controlled cannular drainage may have other advantages. Drugs can be delivered in suprachoroidal or subretinal space at the end of the procedure. Keeping the cannula helps tamponade any vascular injury around the cannula and gives appropriate clotting time at the entry site. Controlled cannular drainage can also be combined with chandelier scleral buckling for the repair of retinal detachment.
All right. Up next, we have VT47 by Dr. Ashish Markal. We don't have him over here at the moment, but we still play his video.
After making 3 standard 25G pars plana ports, core vitrectomy was started. We could appreciate dense vitritis and the presence of a subretinal cyst with overlying exudative retinal detachment. After completing the core vitrectomy, triamcinolone crystals were put on the disc and an attempt to induce PVD was made. Thick hyaloid sheets were removed carefully around the cyst. Here we could appreciate that hyaloid was strongly adherent to the retina, making induction of PVD difficult. The area in the inferotemporal had subretinal scarring, owing to subretinal migration of the cyst, thus inducing fibrosis along its path. Localized diathermy was made using endocautery in the retina over the cyst. Then using the active vacuum with the help of a green tip, the cyst was slowly extruded out from the subretinal space through the retinotomy. It is very important to be gentle and patient while performing this maneuver. We could appreciate the whitish structure within the cyst. This is the scolex of cysticercosis. Finally, with fine maneuverability, the cyst was brought into the vitreous cavity in toto. This whitish subretinal tissue was firm to touch and was the fibrous reaction secondary to the cyst. We also checked for any other daughter cyst underneath the fibrous tissue, but couldn't find any. The cyst was finally eaten up using a vitrectomy cutter. This prevented the need for large incisions to extract the whole cyst in toto. We realized there was a thin sheet of vitreous left over the retina. It was removed using 25 GILM forceps. At the last vitreous base, shaving was done all around using peripheral indentation. Finally, a fluid air exchange was done and retina was attached. Endolaser was done around the area of retinotomy and around the fibrous tissue. Silicone oil tamponade was given at the end, and the ports were sutured. Post-operatively, the retina was attached. Best corrected visual acuity improved to 4/60 at post-operative day 7. The patient also complained of frequent headaches and was referred to neurology to rule out any neurocystic urcosis. MRI was done and it showed multiple well-defined lesions scattered in bilateral cerebral hemispheres with surrounding perilesional edema. The lesions show ring enhancement on T1 weighted images and hypointense on FLAIR images. Imaging findings were consistent with neurocystic urcosis.
All right. Up next, we will have VT69, which is by Dr. Ramanuj Samanta, and he's also present with us in this meeting.
Good afternoon. Cysticercosis with 25 gauge silicone tip assisted suction by temporal pars plana approach. A 55-year-old individual with deep-seated eyes presented with gradually progressive painless diminution of vision in left eye for last 2 months. Fundus revealed an undulating translucent submacular cystic lesion and OCT revealed a tall hyperreflective lesion with small surrounding neurosensory detachment. 3 scleral ports were made at 10, 2 and 4 o'clock, 4 mm from limbus with 25 gauge trocar and cannula, and core vitrectomy was started. Subretinal cysticercosis was noted at the center of the posterior pole. Triamcinolone acetonide was injected in the vitreous cavity for better delineation of hyaloid. Triamcinolone assisted hyaloid removal was done gently by suction with 25 gauge Carter. Special precaution was exercised while removing the hyaloid over fragile subretinal cysticercosis. Any inadvertent rupture of the cyst will lead to release of cysticercus toxin into subretinal space, which may lead to severe inflammatory reaction. Peripheral vitrectomy was performed thereafter with peripheral scleral depression. A retinotomy was made at superior cyst margin and enlarged with help of endocautery for ease of cyst removal. As difficulty was encountered while removing the cyst through superior approach, a temporal approach was reconsidered. With the help of active extrusion, the cyst was gently exteriorized in toto from subretinal space to vitreous cavity through the retinotomy by temporal approach. After exteriorizing the cyst in toto in vitreous cavity, it was engulfed by the 25 gauge cutter rapidly. Advanced fluidic system enables to rapidly wash away all the debris of the cyst. This is followed by fluid air exchange, endolaser was performed around the retinotomy. Gentle laser burns were placed towards foveal margin of retinotomy site. Silicone oil was injected subsequently and scleral ports were closed with help of 7-0-Vicryl.
All right. In the sequence, we have VT112, which is by Dr. Jivitesh Singh, and we have him present here.
This video highlights the importance of high magnification macular lens and its uses in various vitreoretinal surgeries, making the most challenging surgery easier with a cakewalk. This is a case of a tractional retinal detachment in an advanced proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Now we will show you the vast difference between the wide field view versus the high magnification view. The high magnification lens provides 3 times the magnification, which allows ease of identification of membranes. The surgeon can easily find a plane to go beneath the membranes and perform a safe vitrectomy with a deep precision on preserving the macula. This is a case of a taut posterior hyaloid with fibrovascular proliferation. As we can see here, the surgeon identifies the edge of the membrane over the optic disc under this high mag lens, which is then removed in a single go. More to go with the high magnification lenses, which have an important role in epiretinal membranes. Under this high mag, the ERM can be safely removed without accidentally grasping or damaging the retina beneath it. Details of the epiretinal membrane and the internal limiting membrane staining can be clearly delineated so that both are tackled at the same time. In case of florid fibrovascular proliferations over the posterior pole, this high magnification lens allows safety during the carpet dissection of these membranes while avoiding iatrogenic tears. It also allows trimming of these membranes close to the retina with ease and without damaging the macula. Here's another scenario with the high mag lens. See how beautifully here we see the accurate grasping of the taut hyaloid membranes with the internal limiting membrane faucets while visualizing the retina down under. Combine cases of fractional retinal detachment with rhegmatogenous retinal detachment with tabletop traction are extremely challenging. So after performing a core vitrectomy under a wide field lens magnification, we bring this high mag lens into action, which eases the removal of these proliferative membranes using a bimanual approach. This high magnification lens is actually a savior, and it provides confidence of trimming the membranes in total, even in a detached retina, safely so that the retina remains attached under oil or gas. And in cases with a worse visual prognosis, which can be daringly dealt with, providing sight and hope in these complex retinal surgeries, which are otherwise very difficult to visualize with a plain wide field magnification. High magnification lens provides a better contrast, depth, and magnified view of the posterior 60 degrees of fundus during surgery as compared to the 120 degrees of wide field lens with fewer details.
Great. Up next, we have Dr. Bibhuti Kashyap's video, and he's going to play it by himself. Sir, can you please share your screen?
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rescuing a sunken ship that told stories of fishing. I have no financial interest. My case was that of a 60-year-old one-eyed patient presenting with no gain in vision post-cataract surgery for a hypermature cataract of the seeing eye. On examination, the cornea was edematous, the pupil was poorly dilating, was aphakic with posterior capsular rent, though with adequate sulcus visible as the capsular rexus was on the smaller side, and with vitreous in AC. He had total retinal detachment with giant retinal tear corresponding to the clock hour location of the main phaco wound indicative of fishing. B-scan was performed but failed to localize the IOL even though post-op discharge summary of patient had IOL sticker in it. Hence, the operative plan was to do a vitreoretinal surgery to restore anatomic retinal attachment. On table, however, the IOL was visible behind the inferior sulcus in anterior vitreous. Corneal haze, inadequate dilatation of the pupil was precluding adequate fundus view. Dilemma was whether to replace the dropped IOL, which may cause redislocation, or to leave the patient aphakic, which may cause optical hindrance due to air and oil bubble due to pigment dispersion and possible hemorrhage after inferior iridotomy, on top of an already hazy media. The decision was finally taken to perform vitreoretinal surgery after explanting the dislocated IOL and placing in a new IOL to act as a barrier for vitreous substitutes, while restoring the patient's pseudophakic status using the power of IOL sticker from previous surgery done elsewhere. Accordingly, the main phaco wound was enlarged. The IOL was freed from vitreous by grasping the visible haptic with ILM forceps and performing vitrectomy around the IOL. The IOL was explanted from the main phaco wound. A 3-piece IOL was placed in sulcus, and then the main phaco wound was sutured. The pars plana ports were opened, and a core and a peripheral vitrectomy was then performed. PFCL was injected to flatten the retina and unroll the rolled posterior edge of the giant retinal tear. Endolaser photocoagulation was done on the unrolled posterior edge of the giant retinal tear. PFCL air exchange was performed by keeping the active suction with soft tip just anterior to the posterior unrolled edge of the giant retinal tear. PFCL air exchange was completed. A 360-degree endolaser photocoagulation was then performed. As we know and can see, it was a long surgery requiring prolonged mechanical manipulation in a hazy operative field. Placement of the IOL helped maintaining a clear operative field throughout the length of surgery. The IOL sticker of the previous surgery proved to be helpful, thereby strengthening the advocacy of a proper documentation of our procedures. Silicone oil was finally injected, and in this way I was able to restore the anatomical normalcy of my patient's eye along with his pseudophakic status in the same operative sitting. To conclude, hypermature cataracts are troubled waters, and fishing for lens matter loss in vitreous cavity can cause disastrous complications. And finally, anything that is baseless will eventually sink. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vibhuti. Up next, we will be playing VT 165, which is by Dr. Rohan Mehra. He's also present with us.
The authors have no financial interest in the subject matter of this video. As anterior segment cataract surgeons, we are always on the edge. One bad decision and our nucleus can go sinking down into the vitreous. This sight is a nightmare for all cataract surgeons. In this situation, the only option we have is to somehow make an IOL cling on, which is extremely difficult due to the lack of support. Let's take a look at the options available for management of aphakia. In this video, we will discuss about the techniques of scleral fixated PC-IOL. Going through the review of literature, we find multiple techniques used for SF-IOL. One such technique, the flanged intrascleral intraocular lens fixation with double needle technique, requires the use of a cautery to make a flange of the haptics after externalization of the haptics by the railroading method. A review of published literature comments on sutureless SF-IOL techniques and the long-term stability of IOL post-implantation. It finds the results to be acceptable. Many surgeons have modified existing techniques with the aim to make fewer anterior segment manipulations. It is time to cut the suture and go sutureless for SF-IOL implantation. Introducing the VRS technique for SF-IOL implantation. Our technique involves making two scleral pockets at 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock position by using a customized 1.5 mm keratome. This is followed by making a 2.8 mm main port for insertion of foldable IOL. A 25 gauge needle is used to make a sclerotomy at the inner edge of the pocket on both sides. A foldable 3-piece IOL is then injected through the main port. An in-gripping forceps is used to hold the end of the haptic and pull the haptic out through the sclerotomy. The same procedure is done on the other side. Then, with the help of a McPherson's forceps, the pocket is lifted and the haptic is tucked into the pocket. The amount of haptic tucking into the pocket also helps with the centration of the lens. This is a case of a 55-year-old female with a subluxated lens and no capsular support for implantation of PCIOL. We plan to do the VRS technique for SFIOL implantation and start with making the scleral pockets. A custom-made 1.5 mm keratome is used to make the pockets, which has a length of 4 mm till the shoulder. This guides us to the length of the tunnel required. A similar procedure is repeated on the other side. A 15-degree side port is used to make an incision and insert an AC maintainer. Sclerotomy is done using a 25-gauge needle at the inner edge of the pocket on both sides. The nucleus was removed using a phragmatome by a retina surgeon. A 2.8 mm keratome was used to make a main port. A 3-piece lens was injected. An engripping forceps was used in one hand to hold the edge of the haptic as soon as it is released from the cartridge. The haptic is then externalized through the sclerotomy. The same maneuver is done on the other side. Now, with both haptics externalized, they are neatly tucked into the pockets using a McPherson's forceps. The ports are sealed by hydration. Post-operatively on post-op day 1, the results were very satisfying, with well-placed and centered IOLs along with minimal congestion of the conjunctiva. We also documented anterior segment OCT of patients at various time intervals up to 6 months and found no change in the position and centration of IOLs. The widely used Yamane double needle technique for SFIOL involves railroading of the haptic in a 30-gauge needle using engripping forceps. This technique has a longer learning curve and involves more intraocular manipulations along with the use of a cautery to create a flange at the end of the haptic, which has been reported to degrade over time and cause decentration of lens. Another used technique, the X-Knit technique, involves the creation of a 5.5 mm scleral tunnel and insertion of the haptic by railroading method outside the eye. This is followed by pulling the needle and rolling the stopper down to keep the haptic in place. The haptic is then buried into the flap. Let's take a look at some of the complications of SFIOL. In a highly cited paper by Ole Jeka et al., it was reported that among 91 patients operated, 5.5% patients had vitreous strands in the AC and 4.4% developed retinal detachment, which is a high percentage. Suture-related complications were reported by Brendan J. et al. At 27.91% for breakage of suture and 8.2% for retinal detachment. Our experience with the VRS technique has been very encouraging, with complications like retinal detachment and IOL dislocation being extremely low in our 311 cases operated over a follow-up period of 2 years. The advantages of the VRS technique over the existing techniques is that it is less invasive intraocularly and has a shorter learning curve. This technique may easily be performed by anterior segment surgeons. This technique has shown good long-term results and a lower complication rate compared to other techniques and may serve as a simpler alternative technique to the existing ones.
All right. Dr. Ajit, may I have your attention, please? We have Dr. Ashwini Raut here in the meeting with us. Would you like to speak with him?
Yeah. Dr. Ashwini,
Yes, sir.
can you confirm whether you are a AOS ratified AOS member? Because ratification is very essential for getting the award. If you are not ratified, you are not eligible. Unfortunately, in the mark sheet, it was mentioned that you are not a ratified member. You can present the video. There should not be any problem. Just confirm once.
Yeah, okay, sir. Yes, sir.
Are you a ratified member or a non-ratified? Yet to be ratified.
Sir, I registered for AIOS last year only, sir.
Then you are not ratified. This GB, they will ratify your membership.
Okay.
But we will anyhow confirm in the meantime in 5-6 minutes. You can present your video without
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So, sir, may we play the video next?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Dr. Ashwini Raut's video. I'll request the AV to play this, please.
For repairing of refractive macular holes was described a few years ago by Grewal and Mahmood. The indication of this technique include recalcitrant macular hole, chronic macular hole, and macular hole associated with high myopia and staphyloma. Neurosensory retinal autograft forms one of the treatment options in such cases. Case 1. A 55-year-old female with high myopia and posterior staphyloma had posterior pole retinal detachment, for which she underwent left eye pars plana vitrectomy with silicone oil injection. Postoperatively, she was found to have large, full-thickness macular hole with subretinal fluid. She underwent repeat pars plana vitrectomy with relaxing retinectomy and neurosensory retinal autograft. This is the preoperative OCT showing posterior staphyloma with neurosensory detachment. Postoperative OCT after the first surgery showed a full thickness macular hole with residual subretinal fluid and posterior staphyloma. After silicone oil removal, an internal limiting membrane peeling was attempted after staining with brilliant blue dye. Inferior relaxing retinotomy was done, and from the retinotomy edge, a retinal autograft was obtained and placed over the macular hole under perfluorocarbon liquid.
Is the video running? I don't see any video here.
Ma'am, it is stuck. It's not getting played. Like
You're only seeing one slide.
It's not playing at all.
this is the second slide.
But this might be an internet issue. Just give me one moment and the AV person will replay the part, okay?
Barrage laser was done to the retinotomy edges,
It's running, sir.
followed by silicone oil injection. Post-operative fundus picture showed attached retina with laser marks. Post-operative OCT showed closed macular hole with attached retina at posterior pole. Case 2. 25-year-old male with a history of pars plana vitrectomy done for rhegmatogenous retinal detachment presented with reduced vision post-surgery. Intraoperatively, surgeon had a retinal touch injury near the disc margin. Because of scar contraction, he presented with large full-thickness macular hole of more than 1500 micron in size. He underwent repeat pars plana vitrectomy with neurosensory retinal autograft. Barrage laser done superonasal to the disc. Endodiathermy was done to the retinal edges. Perfluorocarbon liquid was used. The graft was mobilized towards the macular hole under perfluorocarbon liquid without lifting, thus to prevent accidental flipping of the graft. Graft was placed over the macular hole. Fluid air exchange was done, followed by silicone oil injection. To conclude, this treatment is extremely useful for closure of recalcitrant and myopic macular holes. It acts as a plug for the hole as well as a scaffold for glial cell proliferation. Adds to the surgical armamentarium for treating challenging cases. Knowledge of this technique among general ophthalmologists will facilitate appropriate referral. Thank you.
Okay, not a problem. Okay. I assume there was a technical glitch with the video because according to the AV person, it was a single slide video with the background noise. Anyway, we'll move forward with VT 182 by Dr. Nilima Balakrishnan. Ma'am, do we have you here, Dr. Nilima? We don't have her here, but we'll still play the video.
The video is not playing, Ekta.
Yes, sir. I think backup AV is facing slow internet. I can see the screen now.
Yeah, let us.
We hereby present a case of chorioretinitis clopiteria managed with subretinal TPA. A 30-year-old gentleman presented to us with a history of firecracker injury to the left eye 6 days back, with a presenting visual acuity of hand movement close to face and accurate projection of rays in all quadrants. On anterior segment examination, he had multiple sphincter tears with traumatic mydriasis, and on indirect ophthalmoscopy, vitreous hemorrhage was seen with bare sclera in the superotemporal quadrant. Ultrasonography was performed preoperatively and there was no evidence of retinal detachment. He was taken up for pars plana vitrectomy under local anesthesia. We initially cleared the vitreous hemorrhage, and an area of chorioretinitis clopiteria was visualized superotemporally extending for approximately 3 clock hours. Blood was removed from the vitreous cavity with cutter, and after adequate exposure, posterior vitreous detachment was induced. Following exposure of the macular region, we found that there was a small full thickness macular hole through which subretinal blood was seeping into the vitreous cavity. Subretinal blood could be visualized under the macula as well as the inferior retina. We did not attempt to remove the subretinal blood through the macular hole as the size of the macular hole was very small. We proceeded to make a small retinotomy superotemporally, and subretinal tissue plasminogen activator was injected at a dose of 12.5 micrograms in 0.1 ml to clear the submacular bleed. BBG dye was used for visualization. Following the lysis of the clot after 10 minutes, blood was aspirated through the retinotomy, thereby clearing most of the submacular blood. However, the inferior subretinal blood could not be removed. Following this, internal limiting membrane peeling was carried out. Laser retinopexy was done at the edges of the bare sclera and around the retinotomy. %, sulfur hexafluoride was injected for endotamponade, and the patient was given prone positioning postoperatively. At 1 month follow-up, there was complete resolution of subretinal bleed as can be seen here, and the best corrected visual acuity had improved to 6/18. On Swepso's OCT, there was type 1 closure of macular hole with few hyperreflective dots at the ellipsoid zone. This case describes successful management of post-traumatic chorioretinitis clopidogrel with subretinal blood and breakthrough vitreous hemorrhage by using subretinal TPA with excellent final visual outcome.
All right. Up next, we have VT209 by Dr. Pushkar Dheep, and I don't think he is present over here in the meeting, but we'll still play the video.
We present a case of a 3-year-old male child which presented to us when parents started noticing an increase in white reflex in the right eye which was increasing since 1 year. We did an examination IDO which revealed a cataractous lens along with whitish membrane and vasculature behind it. USG study revealed a membranous echo extending from the disc to the posterior part of the lens, and impression of a persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous was made. We went ahead with a 3-port sparse splatter vitrectomy under general anesthesia. The 23 gauge cutter which was used was not able to cut the thick vitreous membrane, so we dissected the zonules from the ciliary processes with the help of vitreous scissor. All the attachments between the ciliary processes and the membrane were gradually cut 360 degree. So as you can appreciate that due to the pupil getting constricted while doing the surgery, so we had to use iris hooks for the complete dilatation. So as you can see that we are placing the 4 iris hooks in the 4 quadrants. Once we had put the iris hooks, there was a adequate dilatation and we could see the attachment of the membrane with the ciliary processes on the nasal side. And the cutting was resumed with the help of vitreous scissors, all the connection between the ciliary processes and the membranes were slowly cut. You can very well appreciate the ciliary processes and the membranous attachment. Once the membrane was free from the adhesion, it was cleared of the visual axis with the help of vitreous cutter. To see the posterior retina, we swing in the biome gradually, and what we saw was a persistent hyaloid vasculature which was there in the mid-vitreous cavity. So we did a cauterization of the vasculature, and till the stalk which was present near the disc, we cauterized the vasculature, but we left out the loop which was present at the disc. We did a core vitrectomy. Once the core vitrectomy was done, we did a 360-degree periphery check for any breaks and holes. The stalk at the posterior pole near the disc was not cut, since its arteriovenous connection is there, and if we cut it, it can lead to profuse bleeding. So as you can see, we did a 360-degree check of the vitreous base, and we removed the iris hooks, and all the ports were hydrated, and all the vitrectomy ports were well sutured, and the surgery was closed. Thank you.
All right. Up next, we have VT 310, which is by Dr. Arpita R. And she's here present with us in the meeting.
Not so minimal for a minimally invasive surgery, we describe our technique of using a 26 gauge needle over a 41 gauge needle in performing the retinotomy and subsequent injection of recombinant tissue plasminogen activator for cases with submacular hemorrhage. We have no financial interest for this technique. Submacular hemorrhage is an accumulation of blood either between the neurosensory retina and the retinal pigment epithelium, or between the retinal pigment epithelium and the Bruch's membrane. It poses a potential threat to vision if left untreated. It can arise either from a retinal or from a choroidal circulation. Now the question arises, so as why to intervene in such a cases? It's because it induces an irreversible retinal damage within 24 hours and loss of photoreceptors after 7 days, and it acts as a diffusion barrier for the flow of nutrients. Of the various treatment options available in the literature, the most preferred being pars plana vitrectomy with intravitreal gas injection plus an anti-VEGF injection and a subretinal injection of recombinant tissue plasminogen activator through a 41 gauge needle. The 41 gauge needle is housed over a 30 gauge needle for its easy insertion through a 23 gauge or a 25 gauge vitrectomy port. The disadvantage being its malleability, the resistance for the subretinal injection and its cost. Sharing our experience with 41 gauge needle, through a 23 gauge port. This is a case of a vitreous hemorrhage with breakthrough bleed secondary to a choroidal neovascular membrane. Performing a routine 23 gauge pars plana vitrectomy for clearing the vitreous hemorrhage, we were able to visualize the subretinal hemorrhage. Here, we are trying to create a small retinotomy using a 41 gauge needle, and as we can see, the malleable nature of the 41 gauge needle is causing it to bend, and the transmitted forces which are generated at the tip of the needle causing the retinotomy to extend, which was not intended. A second attempt at a different site altogether caused an iatrogenic retinal break. In case of the 41 gauge needle, we inject the recombinant tissue plasminogen activator first, as the consensus is that it won't offer much resistance due to its small size and internal diameter. But on the contrary, it can cause an inadvertent large retinotomy due to its flexible nature. And also, the resistance offered for the subretinal injection is higher, causing efflux of the injected drug into the vitreous cavity, decreasing its availability in the subretinal space. So, we thought, is there any way to avoid such complications? We came up with an idea of using a more easily available, less malleable, larger but 26 gauge needle for performing a subretinal injection with a unique improvisation. Here is a 69-year male presented to us as a known case of polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy, already treated with multiple anti-VEGF injections with best corrected visual acuity of counting finger close to face, showing a persisting submacular hemorrhage in right eye. After completing the vitrectomy, we have used a 26 gauge needle to make a retinotomy incision, and we injected an air bubble into the subretinal space first, thereby creating an even plane underneath the retina. The buoyancy of the subretinal air, by decreasing the resistance, it helps in the even spread of the recombinant tissue plasminogen activator, which is now injected subsequently. The air, it also tamponates the retinotomy, preventing the efflux of the injected drug. The SF6 gas is injected intravitreally, followed by intravitreal anti-VEGF at the end of surgery. 1 month post of picture, it shows the hemorrhage to be cleared of the macula with improvement in visual acuity to 6/60, with regaining of a near normal foveal contour and resorption of the hemorrhage. The second case is a 62-year female with best corrected visual acuity of 6/60 in left eye. Clinical examination showed the presence of a vitreous hemorrhage and subretinal hemorrhage. Due to media haze, the color photo and OCT were not possible. Ultrasound B scan, it showed a subretinal hemorrhage. A 23 gauge pars plana vitrectomy along with chandelier illumination was performed, and the vitreous hemorrhage was cleared. The PVD was induced, and the subretinal hemorrhage was located mainly at the posterior pole below the inferior arcade. Then we performed the same technique of injecting the subretinal air bubble and the subsequent injection of recombinant tissue plasminogen activator underneath it. The SF6 gas was injected intravitreally, followed by intravitreal anti-VEGF at the end of the surgery. 1 month post of picture, it shows the heme to be displaced inferiorly with relative flattening of the foveal contour. A detailed analysis of the aforementioned cases in our study proves the advantages of 26 gauge needle, which is cheaper, stable and more readily available. The retinotomy created is of the intended size and self-sealing, which does not require a laser. And the injection of air bubble provides more availability of the drug in the subretinal space, thus enhancing its activity and improving the postoperative outcome. Thanks for watching. Hope this not so minimal technique will help in achieving the maximum results.
Now we have one last video that we'll be playing from this session. That is by Dr. Mayur Suresh Kulkarni. We have him present with us here. I request the AV to play the video at full volume.
You're showing a management of a case of a chronic cyclodialysis cleft repair using an innovative sewing machine technique. This was a 38-year-old male with history of blunt trauma to the eye with shuttlecock 3 months back. Best corrected visual acuity in the right eye is 636 and 36, left eye is 66 and 6. The intraocular pressure in the right eye is 6 mm of Hg. In the left eye it's 18 mm of Hg. The anterior segment is showing right eye a shallow anterior chamber, the left eye being absolutely normal. This is the fundus photo of the same patient showing the disc margins being blurred with minimal elevation of the disc and peripapillary retinal edema with retinal folds and hilum folds, choroidal folds temporal to the fovea, and multiple peripheral areas of choroidal detachment. This is the OCT showing multiple choroidal and retinal folds with altered foveal contour with some amount of optic nerve head edema. This is the B scan showing a thickened retinochoroidal complex with a thickened choroid with peripheral choroidal detachments. This is an anterosegment OCT showing cyclodialysis cleft extending 3 to 4 clock hours nasally. So the diagnosis was made of a chronic ocular hypotony secondary to cyclodialysis cleft 3 to 4 hours nasally, for which systemic steroids 1 mg per kg body weight was started and topical hourly steroids were advised with cycloplegics. This is ad follow-up after 3 months with medical management. The fundus photo looks a little worsened with increased disc margin blurriness with disc edema being increased, and peripapillary retinal edema is also increased with retinal folds and hilum folds being persisting, and peripheral areas of choroidal detachments are also persisting. The OCT showing increased multiple choroidal and retinal folds with altered foveal contour and increased optic nerve head thickening. The OCT showing a persistent cyclodialysis cleft as noted before. So the surgery was planned as an ab interno sewing machine technique for repair of cyclodialysis cleft. So a side port is made on the temporal side with injection of a viscoelastic and a temporal indentation with a direct gonio swan Jacob lens. The area of cyclodialysis cleft is identified and marked, which is around 3 to 4 clock hours on the nasal and the inferior nasal side. A straight needle of a 9-0 polypropylene suture was threaded into the bevel of 26 gauge needle, and the needle was retrieved through the hub of the 26 gauge needle and passed it through the syringe. Peritomy was done and 7 mm partial thickness tunnel was made, 3 mm from the limbus with the crescent knife. AC entry was made, pilocarpine was injected, a suture loaded 26 gauge needle was inserted through the temporal corneal incision to reach across to the opposite surface, but it was noted to be difficult, so another entry was made superiorly. Needle was then passed through the detached ciliary body, cleft, sclera, and then exiting through the prepaid scleral bed. The suture emanating from the needle was held with the forceps, and needle was drawn back and forth several times, every 1 to 2 mm from in the defect area to cover the whole cyclodialysis cleft area. With each pass, the loop was held and pulled along. After the last pass, the trailing end of the suture was retrieved and passed through the loops and then knotted with the first free end. Direct gonioscopy with the Sauncher lens was repeated and the confirmation of the cyclodialysis cleft closure was noted. At 1 month follow-up, as we can see that the vision has improved from 636 to 618 and the IOP has increased, and also the fundus examination reveals lesser hyperemia of the disc, resolving disc edema and grossly decreasing ILM folds. In OCT also showing decreased retinochoroidal folds and ILM folds and decreased optic nerve head edema. In B scan, the choroidal thickness has reduced significantly. The anterior segment OCT showing nicely closure of the cyclodialysis cleft. Thus, ab internum modified sewing machine is an effective and minimally invasive endocycloplasty procedure for the treatment of the primary and recalcitrant cyclodialysis cleft. Thank you.
This brings us to an end of watching the videos. Now the panel is open for discussion and questions and answers by the judges to the participants.
I think the questions, judges will remember it now. I think we should have asked that time. What do you think, Malika ma'am? Are we supposed to ask questions?
Not now. It should have been immediately after a video.
Immediately. Now we can't even recollect ourselves.
Yes.
Let's call it a day then. I think who is calling? You are the chairperson?
I think Dr. Natarajan should be, or maybe Ajit Babu. Dr. Ajit Babu is here. Yeah.
Is there?
Yeah.
Sir,
We can have concluding words from all the judges also, because we still have some time. We have time till 4:25 to conclude this session.
Well, I can say that the videos were all very good. The quality was so good that there was really not much difference between them. The only difference was probably the originality of the concept, but the beauty of the videos and was very good.
Yeah, same here. I echo the same sentiments, whatever Dr. Malika has said. So, presenters, you did all of you did absolutely fantastic job. Keep it up. And for few of the people, most of the people, remember, some originality would lead you to the top of the ladder.
Yes, sir. Amazing set of videos, and it's very difficult to judge actually, which is better than the other. Really a tough job.
I thought only I had difficulty.
Vishal is very kind to the candidates. Except for one this thing that Dr. Ashwini is not ratified member.
Right.
So yes, she's not eligible for scoring. So we should not score her. I verified with the scientific committee office also. So she's not ratified member.
Her video didn't run anyway, isn't it? Her video did not even run.
But
Yeah.
people may score, so let us leave it as it is.
Yeah.
Rest all are
all the
fine,
participants present still, or they have left the hall?
all the presenters are finished actually.
No, if the presenters are present,
then we can ask.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, we can call one by one and ask a couple of questions each.
Dinesh, we have forgotten the content of the videos. What are you going to ask out of the blue? I don't think it's the right way.
Start from the last video. Then
Recent memory.
No. I don't think so. Makes sense.
No, I don't think he's doing it for the scoring,
not gone.
just for his academic interest. I don't think scoring will change from that.
Scoring is anyhow over.
Already done, yeah.
Yeah, scoring actually I've already done, but
no.
I just wanted to ask Jivitesh, this is the non-contact lenses he is using, or he is using those contact lenses.
So this was the supramacular lens. The surgeon here is actually Dr. Shreen Briganza. So she compiled all the case scenarios where we were using this supramacular lens, the lens by Vogue. I didn't mention the name because of the financial, didn't want to mention in the video, but because you asked.
No, but these are contact lenses, handheld contact lenses,
Yes, sir, yes, sir.
not biome type of lenses.
No, not biome type, handheld contact lenses.
These are handheld contact lenses.
So mainly, this was all these case scenarios were with the supramacular lens.
Good, very nice. So what will be your preference? Because I feel all these lenses, they are indirect lenses actually.
True.
Even the supramacula, even the mini quad XL and all. Do you feel the stereopsis gets lost when you are using indirect lenses compared to when you use lenders?
Lenders, sir, although the view is like a little, the degree of field, the degree is slightly less. The lenders might have some edge, like in like here you can have around like 35 to 40 degree of field of view. So you can do a little, you can have a magnified view along with the degree of the field also. But in lenders, it becomes a little constricted. So both have their own advantages and disadvantages. If you feel you like lenders might give a little more constricted field. So depending on like what step you are doing, like you can change the lens. We use both the lenses. We use lenders also in between. So, but this case series were specifically pertaining to the supramacular lens.
I think Dr. Natarajan will have a lot of experience with non-contact lenses.
Yeah.
So, can you, sir, elaborate it a little more whether like non-contact lenses equally well with the kind of ReSight or biome?
Yeah, but I
think biome also comes with a high mag lens now.
Yes. So the quality of image will be this non-contact is a virtual, and this one the contact will be the better one quality wise.
Hello.
But still, I think as you said, ReSight and other one have the macula lens, and you can have even with the biome, and the newer company also has made it, which has a good lens for the macula.
We have both ReSight macular lens as well as contact lens. I always use the irrigating contact lens, which gives you the depth of perception much better. So initial dissection, everything I do with irrigating contact lens. Then I switch on to the wide angle ReSight wide angle lens. So
yeah,
I can cover both the
is lost
posterior
with
as well as
indirect lenses. So that's great. Dr. Vishal, he might have a experience with these. Is he? Vishal Agarwal is there? Prashant, you have what kind of lenses do you use?
No, I am not a man with a lot many lenses collection. I only use single lens, that is a biome non-contact, which is a piggyback lens, which gives you a good magnified view of a macula as well as periphery. That is 110 degree. That's it, not beyond that. And with that same, I can do macula as well as the periphery. I've been doing for years now, since 2002 to be precise. After Dr. Natarajan inspired me for non-contact biome.
Yeah, I mean, I have also not had any problems with biome for the macular surgery. You just have to increase the zoom, that's all.
Yeah, that's it.
I will just like to make a point here that it is good for everything macular and peripheral surgeries. But in cases of high myopes, in posterior staphyloma cases, in very pathological myopes, the forceps touches the shaft of the forceps touches the rim of the non-contact system. In that few cases, I might prefer to use a Chelum lens or a contact wide angle system.
Thank you, sir.
I think we can wind up. We have a
Doctor, we still have 20 minutes to end this session. So if there's any discussion pertaining to the topic, are we done? Okay.
Yeah, I think we can wind it up.
Okay.
Do we
In
send
that
these,
case,
where do we send these mark sheets?
AIOS secretary.
AIOS, they have given a number. I already sent. I will
AIOS
spell it
support.
out. Okay. They
Is
have
that
given him a number.
6385821300? Is it?
Yeah, ma'am.
821
Just,
300. I
please
already
share
sent
it in
the mark sheet.
please share it in that judges group, video session.
Yeah.
It has to be anonymous.
The number
Okay,
I
sir.
will share it with all
It
the
has to be
families. Okay.
it has to be anonymous. You can't share it in the group.
Yeah,
No.
WhatsApp
Group.
group.
No, number.
The number of
mobile
phone
number.
number I will share.
Mobile number you can.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Thank you.